I'm Tom. I'm at Sweet Maria's Coffee, and I wanted to make a video today about cheapness. Cheapness in making coffee. And the reason I wanted to make it about cheapness isn't actually the price of what these things cost in order to make coffee, but it's kind of like, what is the minimum that you need? What are the sort of extras that are kind of frilly? And what is the base materials that you need to make good coffee at home, to produce a nice cup of coffee? And of course, this is all my opinion. Well, I wanted to start with something that, to me, of course, very biased, but that you cannot skimp on in coffee, and that is green coffee. So the problem is in coffee is that once you have your green coffee, of course, there's all the things that go into making this. But in order to get this, you basically cannot improve on this. You can only sort of ruin it, more or less, through the processing, through roasting, grinding, and brewing. You can only kind of like lose quality. That sounds like an incredibly negative point of view, but you can't basically turn mediocre green coffee into something better. So maybe that's a little bit better way to say it. So you have to start with decent green coffee. And what is the cheapest way to make green coffee brown? So my favorite is an old popcorn popper. You can find these at thrift stores still. You can find them on eBay. Their auction prices have been driven way up on these. This one we got locally, $6.99. And this is Poppery 2. If you can find the Poppery 1, that's the ultimate roaster. It's got that great styling, beautiful yellow urine-like tint. And another way to do it is a stovetop popcorn popper. In fact, this induction burner that I'm using here to heat up my water for my brewing part of this also works great with this newer model that we just got. Not with the older model that's aluminum, but this one has a magnetic steel bottom, so it can work on an induction burner, which is great. So I'm not going to show any roasting. I'm going to skip to brewing. So what either of these roasting processes can produce a really nice cup of coffee. I roast coffee every weekend pretty much in an air popcorn popper like this one. And I produce coffee that's similar to the quality of our sample roaster here. It's perfectly nice. I don't have great control, but I like what I get. So this is about the brewing section. So brewing coffee, there's certain criteria, but it doesn't have to be expensive. So that you need to reach. First, you've got to take your roasted coffee and grind it. And since actually I really want coffee, I'm just going to start grinding. This is my little Porlex grinder. These are not that inexpensive. These are a little pricey, but you get to use it for travel. You get a little workout. It's a nice thing in the morning. If you want to use an electric mill, you have to sort of spend up a little. We are now carrying one from Capresso that we think is reasonably good. That's a burr grinder. But another option is a whirling blade grinder. So we started carrying this. I mean, they're getting actually harder to find, and I found they're pretty hard to find in thrift stores for the old Brown and those models. But this Nesco model is really inexpensive. And what we really like is that it grinds, and you can remove the cup with the burr and pour it wherever you want it to go. This basically bashes coffee into smaller and smaller bits as you use it. But as your parents and grandparents, and maybe you, have experienced that you can get a good touch with this. And for a paper filter type drip method, where the fines that you get from this, the fine set particles and the more granular, larger, bolder type particles, that your paper filter is sort of compensating, and it does okay. The cost is great. They last a really long time, and they're inexpensive. But I do like the hand grinders. I like the process, and this is what I use at home and traveling on the road. So the next thing is, what am I going to brew with, and what am I going to brew into? I travel with AeroPress. AeroPress is not the lowest cost option we have for traveling, but I think it's super versatile, and I use it at home about 50% of the time. So AeroPress is a good option. They sort of scratch up and get ugly over time, and the rubber stopper does wear down a bit. You get this package of filters that lasts a very, very long time with it. So very low cost because you wrap in the cost of the filters. You're basically not going to be buying them for maybe a year when you get your initial AeroPress. The other method I use is pour over at home. And, you know, it's sort of funny how classy pour over has gotten. You go in cafes and they have these hot water dispensing systems and brew bars with this and that and different techniques and stuff. We have a whole range here of different ones. Let me show you what we have. We do carry the Bonmac model, which is not as cheap as that was. Has your little view thing, which I can't figure out exactly what you use that for. But what I like is about these number 2 models is you can actually use a small number 1 filter in them. So you can go with number 1 or number 2. So if you're making a small amount of coffee, I actually prefer number 1 because I never am overfilling this. And number 2 usually actually comes higher than the, well, actually this is a number 2, it's a little crumpled. It comes up higher than the lip on a number 2. Don't ask me why. So we do have the Harios, which are actually not that much more than the Bonmac brewer. Hario has the big hole, and Hario is much more technique dependent. You have to be careful how you bloom it and careful how you time the water because otherwise it just falls through very quickly. I'm actually less into the Hario personally. We have a very small model Clever brewer, which is a good option and controls the pour for you. And we have this giant old thing, if you just want to go big, it's a number 6. And that's very reasonably priced. Let's discuss what we're going to pour into. Now, I'm very partial to these because we just produce them ourselves, and they're lab glass. We're going to make a smaller version too that you can brew into with a lot of different devices. And I just like glass. I just like porcelain and glass. It's just, you know, a step above using a plastic of any kind. But that's going to be very reasonable price. But my mom basically brewed coffee into a mason jar for years with a plastic Melita filter. And she did something like this, which is you just make insulation. This is just made out of jute bag because we've got a lot of them. But what you do is you just buy this jute string, which is super useful to have around the house, and you coil it around the top. And you just keep coiling until you get a nice grip that you can hold your mason jar by. And also for a small size, this is the brand of quasi-fancy jelly I buy, and these are just great for brewing into. So there's so many different options. You really don't need to buy something to brew into. And I love how that fits real tightly on the AeroPress. I make 350 milliliters, and that is just perfect. So you've got a large size and small size, and it's pretty much, what do these cost? I mean, you can find either of these at thrift stores if you don't have them. So we do have some other things. We have, you know, this is great for travel. It's because it's shatterproof. It's made, for, you know, by the people who do the Clever. These are extremely useful, and they're very cheap. These sort of frothing pitcher things. You can use these for all kinds of things. And they pour well enough in order to dispense water into a brewer to have some decent degree of control. The one thing it's a sort of upgrade is to have a kettle. I really wasn't into these initially when everyone was like, pour this way, pour that way. But I just do find that you can't, in a normal sort of jug type electric brewer, electric water heater, just sort of dump water in and get the kind of, maybe not even to direct the water exactly where you want to, but just to the rate of flow that you might want. That sounds kind of highfalutin, but once you start using one of these, you kind of don't go back. So, plus when you're sick, you can put your face right over this and steam. If you have a cold, you can generate steam. Otherwise, you can also burn your hairs off on that. So you have to watch out for those little holes there. So, Bueno Kettle. It's semi-Bueno. So what other things are really important? We've got, you know, a sort of reasonable grinder, decent coffee, freshly roasted, brewers that are, you know, fairly cheap, and non-fancy receptacles to do it. Coffee preparation and stuff just seems to be getting more and more complicated. And part of that is that cafes want to model for you a very elaborate process, which is fine, except it's a little disempowering. If they're modeling something that you can't do at home in order to prove the professionalism of a store, maybe that comforts somebody paying $4 for a cup of coffee in that moment. But then they go home and they brew something less than that, and they feel like they can't do it without all those extra fancy things at the cafe. So I'm against that. I'm not against the cafes. I'm not against the fancy stuff. But I'm for keeping things simple and having people just enjoy coffee in whatever way they can. I really need a cup of coffee, so I'm going to actually continue making my own here.